For my project, I wanted to make a Greek Pyxis box using my ceramics class. I started off by wedging the clay, and once I was done wedging the clay, I placed it on the wheel and cut off a piece for the lid. Then I tried to center the clay. Centering the clay includes a process of coning up the clay and then compressing it back down and pushing it toward the center. Once centered, I created a hole in the center of the clay, opened it out, compressed the bottom, and started pulling. And you can see as I start to do that here in a second. I pulled the clay up until I liked the height, and then I started shaping the clay for my Pyxis box. You can see me pulling all of that clay up, shaping it. I had to get the slip off the side before I shaped it. Once I had the shape where I wanted it, I started to work on the galley. That's where the lid was going to rest on. I did that by compressing just a section of it and then making sure that it was still that shape I wanted. Once I was done making the galley, I started on the lid using a similar process to the actual box. Instead of entering in the center of the clay, I entered more to the side to create the handle in the center. Most of the process for the lid was making sure the lid fit the pot and getting that style and shape correct. I also didn't want it to be too thick, too big, and you can see I use these things called calipers in order to do that. That's that tool. Basically, I just measured the inside of the lid and the outside, or the inside of the box and then the outside of the lid to make sure that it matched up so that it could fit. Once I was done, I set it in the drying room to dry out more. I waited for it to dry for a couple of days and then started the trimming process. I started off by centering the pot upside down, then I trimmed the sides and created a glazed catch at the bottom of the pot. After the glazed catch was made, I worked on the foot by trimming from the center out to the edge. I also wanted to make more traditional feet, and I did that by carving out sections from the bottom and then smoothing them down. Once I was satisfied with that, you can see in a bit, I start to recenter the pot right side up. That way I can actually start to trim the lid for it. There you go, you see I do that. All of this is just to make sure that the lid fits nice and snug in the pot. I made sure to trim some of the galley so that it was a lot more even, it wasn't as wonky. I trimmed the bottom of the lid so that it wasn't too thick and it fit a little bit better. At some point, I decided that I didn't like that top part of the handle, and so I just kind of cut it off and then trim it, smooth it, make it look like a nice little handle. At one point, it looked like it was getting a little too thin, so I had to stop where I was at. But once I got all of the trimming done, I started to work on the design. I used a few references for the design. I wanted it to look similar to other Greek pottery I've seen. Now I'm going to carve that design into the box. And while I carve the design into the Pyxis box, I want to talk about what a Pyxis box actually is. Pyxis boxes were cylindrical boxes with lids that were used to store jewelry, cosmetics, trinkets, you name it. They were considered luxury items and only given to the wealthy. Being items for the wealthy, the elaborate art carved into these boxes usually depicted scenes that spoke of wealth and social status. Later editions of these boxes were made with silver, gold, or ivory. However, clay was still a popular choice. Now I will go back to describing my process. I used an X-Acto knife and a sewing needle to carve along where I sketched it out for the Pyxis box, and you can see I'm just working my way, carving everything in. I also used a paintbrush to get rid of some of my pencil lines as I work on it a little bit more. The top I had kind of a classic Greek design. Here I have the Greek pillars. This person is kind of holding paintbrushes. And then once I had the design in there, I let it get bisque fired and I started the glazing process. I dipped the box into the glaze and waited for it to dry and then dipped the lid. I used a Vaucus black glaze and tried to dip it quickly so it wouldn't cover the design when it got fired. Then I mostly spent the rest of the time cleaning off the glaze from parts that might stick to each other or to the kiln. This can happen because the glaze drips and runs down, and when you fire glaze it solidifies, so I have to make sure it doesn't solidify together. I had to work a lot on making sure that the glaze in that lid was completely off so it didn't adhere to each other. And with this Vaucus black glaze, my idea was for it to become, it turns into more of a brown, so I wanted it to kind of be a brown and still show some of the design to make it look similar to what the actual Pyxis boxes looked like. Even though the Pyxis boxes used a different method, I just used what I could. Here I am just making sure that that lid isn't going to stick, wiping off that glaze, working on it, and there you can see with the glaze on there. After it was done, I put it on the rack to be fired, and here is the finished product. The glaze did cover up the design, which is disappointing, but I do think the design on the lid at least turned out great. You can kind of see in the light the design, but I just don't think that I had carved it in deep enough for it to adhere and actually show through. Here you can see a little bit of the lines. Overall, I like how it turned out. Here are my sources, and that is the end of my project. Thank you so much.